Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Public Accounts. This is meeting number 80 of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, Thursday, November 13th, 2017. I would remind everyone this morning that we are televised, and so if you could please take your telephones and put them on vibrate or mute or something. It saves, especially when the mics are on, so please do that. Today we are having a briefing on the fall 2017 report of the Auditor General of Canada. As our witnesses today, we have Mr. Michael Ferguson, our Auditor General of Canada. He is accompanied by his principals, Jean Goulet, Martin Dompierre, Casey Thomas, and Carol McCalla. I would invite the Auditor General of Canada to make his comments before we go into the usual first, second rounds of questioning from our committee members. So welcome again, good morning, and the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Chair, I'm pleased to be here to present the findings of 6 performance audits and 2 special examinations that were tabled in the House of Commons on Tuesday. When I look at these audits together, I find that, once again, I am struck by the fact that departments do not consider the results of their programs and services from the point of the citizens they serve. I find myself delivering this message audit after audit and year after year because we see that departments are focused on their own activities and not on the citizen's perspective. The audits we have delivered this week are no exception, as you will see. Let's start with our audit of the Phoenix Pay system. Here, we looked at what Public Services and Procurement Canada, or PSPC, and selected departments and agencies we were doing to fix problems with the system and eventually have a system that takes less effort to pay government employees, not more.
After the federal government launched the Phoenix Pay system, over 150,000 public servants were still waiting for a pay request to be processed. The value of outstanding pay errors, including employees who were paid too little and those who were paid too much, was about $500 million at the end of June 2017. We found that Public Services and Procurement Canada has been largely reacting to problems since Phoenix was launched. In our view, it will take years to fix the pay system, and it will cost much more than the $540 million the government has so far identified that it will spend. In a similar situation in Queensland, Australia, it took 7 years and $1.2 billion to fix most of the pay problems.
Next, I will turn to our audit of how the Canada Revenue Agency's call centres handle inquiries from taxpayers. Overall, we found that the customer service results that the Canada Revenue Agency reports makes its call centre look better than it really is. For example, the agency says that 90% of callers are able to connect with either its self-service system or a call centre agent. While this is technically true, it only reflects part of the caller's experience. The CRA's reported rate does not reflect that on average, a taxpayer has to call about 4 times in a week just to get through to the agency.
Revenue Agency's numbers didn't account for the 29 million calls it blocked in a year, more than half its total call volume. Those calls either get a busy signal, a message to visit the agency's website, or a message to call back later. Overall, we found that only 36% of calls were able to connect. Based on our tests and those done by others, we found that the Canada Revenue Agency gave taxpayers wrong answers to their questions almost 30% of the time. This is significantly higher than the roughly 6.5% error rate estimated by the agency. Passons maintenant à notre audit.
Let's go now to an audit that looked at Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada's $257 million initiative to help Syrian refugees settle in Canada. Overall, we found that the settlement leads of more than 80% of Syrian refugees were assessed.
Two main concerns. First, Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada delayed the transfer of $51 million to its service providers by at least 3 months, which caused some service reductions. Second, the Department didn't collect all the information it needed to monitor whether Syrian refugees were integrating into Canada. For example, it didn't know what proportion of school-aged Syrian children were enrolled in school.
In another audit, we looked at Health Canada's programs to help Inuit and First Nations people improve their oral health. Overall, we found that Health Canada spends more than $200 million a year on medically necessary dental services for Inuit and First Nations people. Even though the department knows that the oral health of Inuit and First Nations people is significantly worse than that of the rest of Canadians, it does not know how much of a difference its dental benefit program makes.
Know that its $5 million Children's Oral Health Initiative, which is focused on prevention, improved the oral health of some First Nations and Inuit children. However, the Department's data shows that fewer children are now enrolled and fewer services are provided under the initiative than in previous years. Health Canada does not know why this is the case, making it difficult to address the situation. In our audit of Correctional Service Canada, we found that CSC's programs and services did not meet the rehabilitation needs of women offenders, especially those with mental illness. The tool that CSC uses to assign women offenders to security levels in correctional programs was designed to assess men, not women. As a result, some women offenders were held at a higher security level than necessary and were assigned to programs that CSC could not deliver before the majority of offenders were first eligible for parole. A delayed release means that women offenders do not have a gradual re-entry into the community, and it also costs more to keep them in a correctional facility. Nous avons constaté que les équipes...
We found that Correctional Service Canada's mental health teams were not fully staffed to provide the mental health services that women offenders needed. We also found that CSC placed in segregation cells women offenders who were at risk of harming themselves or suicide. It is not appropriate to keep women offenders with serious mental health issues in segregation cells where they do not get the clinical support they need. In another audit, we focused on whether the Royal Military College of Canada educates and trains officer cadets at a reasonable cost to take on leadership roles in the Canadian Armed Forces. The Royal Military College of Canada is a federally funded university. We found that the quality of the college's academic programs is good, but it spends about twice as much per student as other universities. National Defence was unable to show how the military officers trained at the college were more effective in their jobs than those who came into the Canadian Armed Forces through other entry plans.
Military College of Canada did not provide officer cadets with adequate training in leadership and in the proper conduct expected of future officers. While the college took action when serious incidents of misconduct were reported, the number of incidents involving senior officer cadets showed that the college had not prepared them to serve as role models for their peers. In our opinion, the academic environment at the college does not consistently support the teaching of military conduct and ethical behavior. The college must re-establish its focus as a military training institution so that it can produce the leaders the Canadian Armed Forces require. Nos rapports au Parlement de...
Our fall reports to Parliament also include copies of the special examination reports, which were delivered to Atomic Energy of Canada Limited and the National Capital Commission since the release of our spring reports. Overall, we found that Atomic Energy of Canada Limited had in place the systems and practices it needed to successfully implement its government-owned, contractor-operated business model. The corporation now needs to turn its attention to measuring whether this new model is efficient and effective.
The Capital Commission found that more than 1/4 of the NCC's assets, some of which are of historical value, were in fair, poor, or critical condition. The Commission's resources, as authorized in its approved corporate plan, are not sufficient to restore and maintain these assets. The NCC has committed to finalizing an analysis of the resources it needs and develop options to address the situation. I was hoping that I would be able to talk about something other than results for citizens. I keep delivering the same message, that the government doesn't understand its results from the citizen's perspective. It's possible that our message of citizen-centric service delivery has been heard at the individual program level. However, we see no signs of it being picked up government-wide. Quand nous entamons des...
As we begin new audits, we find the same absence of focus on fully understanding what Canadians are getting from government programs, whether it's answers to their tax questions, mental health support for women offenders, improved oral health for Inuit and First Nations, or the extent of the problems the government has to pay its employees.
Not being heard at a whole-of-government level, and that concerns me. Government is supposed to be about service to citizens. Getting there requires a concerted effort across government to understand and measure the citizen experience, not just one program at a time, but across all programs and services. Monsieur le Président, merci.
Mr. Chair, that concludes my opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ferguson, for your audit and for your words this morning. We'll now move into the first round of questioning, 7-minute round. Monsieur Massé.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Ferguson, I'd like to thank you very much, and you and your team, for all the work that you do every day. Your reports are based on objective analysis, factual analysis, and obviously you make sure that public funds are spent correctly and are managed properly. My questions will focus more on your Phoenix System report. This report, although the other reports concern me as well, I just want to say right off the bat that my thoughts go to all public servants who are affected by the Phoenix problems. My thoughts also go to all public servants in Miramichi, in Matam and Ottawa and elsewhere who I know are working tirelessly to remedy this issue. All the members here at the House, I'm sure, like me, receive emails and telephone calls from public servants who have serious difficulties. So our thoughts are with them. I'll give you a bit of background here. I'd like to say that the previous pay system was 40 years old. And your predecessor, in one of his reports in 2010, said that, well, I'll give you the quote in English.
Wide and severe consequences. At worst, the government could no longer conduct its business and deliver service to Canadians. Donc, il était clair qu'il fallait passer à un nouveau système.
So it's clear we needed a new system. But 7 years later, here we are today. And to understand the extent of the problem, the system is not simple. There's more than 300,000 public servants in Canada, roughly 100 departments, many collective agreements. The pay system has to deal with 9 million transactions per year, and these transactions involve sums worth roughly $20 billion a year. So it's a big system. And the Canadian government selected a system, PeopleSoft system, from IBM. And my question is very simple for you. If there was a magic wand and we could somehow solve all these pay problems, the 494,000 problems that are pending, if we had a magic wand, based on your analyses and all the discussions you had on the topic with public servants, could we today make the system work? Could these pay transactions work if all the problems disappear right now? That's not the case, obviously. There are problems. There are big problems, as you mentioned. We can examine these problems overall, but there are also very specific problems for each individual affected by these issues. So, of course, now there are still issues with the system. The system is unable to process all the pay requests in an appropriate fashion, even today. As we indicated in our audit, the problems are continuing to get worse until the end of our audit in June of 2017. Even after months with this new system and all the work that was done to try and fix the issues, the system is still unable to conduct several pay requests in an appropriate fashion. In your report, in paragraph 154, you say that the department restricted access to uses to the system and pay advisors could not access some parts of Phoenix for roughly 5 days out of every 10-day pay cycle. I'd like to hear what you have to say about that. If I understand correctly, we can hire hundreds of additional public servants to try and fix these issues and try to fix all these gaps and establish workarounds. But I'd like you to clarify this. Is it still the case today? Does the pay system can only be used 50% of the time? Thank you for your question. The information provided in the report reflects the system at June 30th. The department told us that this situation was getting better. However, you can understand that we were unable to verify whether this is actually the case. So, about workarounds to fix these problems, to deal with this, the department, during these 5 days, the public servants entered figures in an Excel files, and then when the systems were back up, these files and figures were uploaded into the system. However, this process also was erroneous. So it seems that there has been some improvement according to them, but we were unable to verify this. Mr. Chair, I know we only have 30 seconds left. I'm not sure if I should ask you this, but what's the solution? How do we grapple with this issue? It's a very difficult to solve all these problems. There's some necessary stages. We have to have a good governance structure to make sure that the plans are respected. It's obviously important to have a full action plan with all the necessary projects to solve these issues. It's also important to focus, firstly, on on paying employees the right amount at the right time. And then it's also important to add new ways of making the system effective. So these are overall stages that will have to be conducted.
Monsieur Deltel, vous avez 7 minutes.
Merci.
Deltel, you have 7 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Congratulations for your French, that it continues to improve. And we know that you have an example right in front of you, Mr. Ferguson. He's a model for French speakers, so thank you very much. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the House of Commons. First, I'd like to repeat what my colleague, Mr. Massé, said earlier. I'd like to talk about Phoenix, and our thoughts go first and foremost to the thousands of Canadian workers that are unfortunately still waiting to be paid correctly. In my writing, like everyone else, I have public servants. Of course, you know, I'm from Quebec. 2 weeks ago, I met with Madame Christine Bourget in a restaurant. We had lunch together, and she was crying and telling me her personal sad story. So I'm thinking of these type of people today, and of course, I know you had them in mind when you were writing this report. Mr. Chair, as Mr. Ferguson describes very well in his report, in the very first paragraphs, it's a 40-year-old system that had to be updated, and took 7 years before we got to where we are today. Obviously, this creates concerns. In 2015, under the previous government, the policymakers decided to suspend the program because they didn't think it was ready enough yet. And then in February 2016, the government pushed the button to implement Phoenix with all the tragedies that we've heard since. And it was relaunched in April, and they said everything was fine, but now we realize that this was not the case. In your report, Mr. Ferguson, I'd like to quote Article 1.86, which is, we noticed that over the past 16 months, no overall surveillance structure or governance structure was established. Public Services and Canada did not cooperate with departments. There was no governance structure established to determine whether working groups were defining the roles and responsibilities necessary to have a clear way forward and to coordinate their operations. They had their head in the sand. They didn't want to face reality, and they worked in silos rather than working in hand. Mr. Ferguson, how can you explain such behavior? Still difficult for me to explain the situation or the reason why this happened as such. It's a situation we identified during our audit. First, the PSPC considered that there was a problem with 82,000 employees, and they said that these problems would be fixed by October of 2016. So the first problem was that the department wasn't aware of the fact that these problems were more serious than the department realized at first. And then it took some time. It took time before the department and the Treasury Board Secretariat decided that they had to set up a governance structure. And towards the end of our audit period, these two organizations started to establish the necessary structure. So it's really important to have a governance structure. This means that the department and the Treasury Board Secretariat and all of the other departments that are affected directly by these issues, so they could be at the table together and determine how to solve this issue.
For the 16 full month, we have no coordination, and everybody tried to fix it without speaking to each other. In that case, we need leadership. In that case, we need someone who called the shot. In that case, we need an indication from the top, not from the bottom. And unfortunately, this situation was not fixed, and it took 16 months to address this dramatic issue. That's a shame. But, Mr. Speaker, the Auditor General at the Article 1.86 talk about another situation. We talk about Queensland Health Group in Australia. And to them, if we read your report, in Australia, after only 4 months, the Australian people recognize the difficulty of that system and fix it. How come?
So I'll start, and then I'll turn it over to Monsieur Goulet to give you some more details. But certainly the difference was that in Queensland, Australia Health Authority, they identified very quickly that they had a problem. They identified the size of the problem and that it was going to take serious efforts to fix it. As we say in the report, they then worked on it for, going on into 8 years, and it has taken them that period of time to get most of these problems under control. But I'll ask Monsieur Goulet to provide more details.
So thank you very much. The situation in Queensland was, fortunately and unfortunately for them, a little bit different because it concerned only one department as opposed to 101 departments. So from a question of leadership, it was easier to establish a sole point of leadership within the department. What is really different in that particular case is that the leadership decided to go out to the public servants over there, to the health workers, and explain to them in a very regular fashion what was going on, and really put forward a very structured plan, not only to try to stabilize the situation, but also to make sure very rapidly that the employees were paid on time accurately. And that even meant that kiosks were established in the various hospitals so that employees could go to those kiosks, demonstrate that they were not being paid accurately, and a check could be written to those employees at that point. So there are some fundamental differences. Queensland also was a scope that was not as big as what we're living here now, which made an understanding of what was going on probably easier. We're talking about 78,000 employees, one department, 20,000 rules. But regardless, it still took all that time. I just want to also clarify the fact that now, they stabilized the situation quite rapidly, but it took them 7 years to get to a point where they're achieving the efficiencies that they had originally intended to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to have to come back to that. Our time is up. And we'll now move to Mr. Christofferson, please, for 7 minutes.
Very good. Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Mr. Ferguson, and all your staff. Where to begin, first time ever, I've talked to a couple of colleagues, and I'm pushing, and I think there's a lot of appetite for doing a hearing on every one of these. Number one, there's only 6. Number two, this committee is incredibly efficient when we want to be and get a lot of work done. And every one of these touches on not just a one-off, but a significant aspect of government services to citizens. So I hope, colleagues, that we can find our way clear to allow our schedule to hold a public hearing on each and every one of these chapters. Chair, given that we're sort of dealing with the macro report as well as the individual chapters, I'd like you to spend a little bit of my time talking about the macro message that our Auditor General is bringing today, if with your permission. Mr. Ferguson, you both opened your remarks and closed your remarks with the same thing. And in terms of auditor speak, it's pretty strong language. And I just want to take a moment to underscore it and then pose a couple of questions about going forward. But again, colleagues, we have an obligation. It's we're where the rubber hits the road here, and all the good work that the Auditor General does, if we're not able to reflect change in government, all this is for nothing. So it's really important that we get not only the micro right, but the macro right. So when I see the Auditor General tell us, quote, "When I look at these audits together, I find that once again, I'm struck by the fact that that departments do not consider the results of their programs and services from the point of view of the citizens they serve. And again, we've now learned from our Auditor General that, in his opinion, what that means is a lot of departments are getting very good at measuring how they move things inside. So they do an A and B as part of their process and measure that and then announce and pronounce whether they're doing really well or really bad, when the point is, at the end of the day, what service are Canadians receiving? And so, again, the auditor is saying, and I go on, I find myself delivering this message audit after audit and year after year. And because we still see that departments are focused on their own activities, which I just gave an example of, and not on the citizen's perspective. The audits we have delivered this week are no exception. And again, the Auditor General ends with, I was hoping I'd be able to talk about something other than results for citizens. I keep delivering the same message that the government does not understand its results from the citizen's perspective. I mean, this is strong stuff coming from auditors. It is possible that our message of citizen-centric service delivery has been heard at the individual program level. However, we see no sign of it being picked up government-wide. And interestingly, my experience is normally it's the other way around. The top of the house sort of says, oh yeah, we understand, we get that, we'll get on that. And then they leave, and it never seems to filter down to the departments. Now we see sometimes some of the departments are getting it, but there's still no macro leadership. I'll jump to the last and then go to the pose a question, Chair. Again, continuing with the Auditor General, it appears that our message is not being heard at the whole of government level, and that concerns me. Government is supposed to be about service to citizens. Getting there requires a concerted effort across government to understand and measure the citizen experience, not just one program at a time, but across all programs and services. So again, if we as a government, all of us, Parliament, are not meeting the needs of Canadians through the services that are delivered, then citizens have every right to believe that their tax money is just being wasted. And we're about eliminating waste. So what I want to ask to you, Auditor General, I don't know what the current terminology is, I'm getting kind of old, but blue skying, outside the box, whatever the new terms are, obviously what we're doing is not working. What can we do that's extraordinary? Are there any steps we can take that are really, pushing the limits of what we can do as a committee working with you? But this can't continue. I've been here 14 years. I don't want to sit here for another 14 years having the Auditor General come in time after time after time and say the same damn thing and nothing changes. So we are that agent of change. What can we do, Mr. Ferguson? Push the limits of what we can do. How can we help you turn government around so it's meeting the needs of its citizens? How can we do that, sir?
So I'll talk about one thing, first of all, that you have taken a step into, and then perhaps something else as well. I think that you have now, this committee has now held a hearing with a department a second time, bringing them back about a year or a year and a half after, to talk about an audit that had been done before, and I think that sends a good message throughout the whole system that this committee is serious about departments actually fixing the problems that we see. So that's something that has already started, and I would encourage the committee to continue to do that, because I think that's an important message for the system. But the other thing I think is, and in terms of the message that I delivered today, part of what I'm trying to get at is, so we will do an audit. We will identify some issues. We'll make recommendations. The department will say, yes, we will deal with those. And they may very well, right, go back and deal with it, and we won't really know whether they have or how well they've done it until we come back and do a follow-up audit. So they may very well do that. But I guess what concerns me is, and I'll take the example of the call center audit with CRA. The message in that audit, overall high-level message in that audit, is not very different than the message that we delivered a few years ago on veterans trying to get access to mental health services. Okay? So I guess what concerns me, and when I'm talking about the whole of government level, is why are departments, it almost seems like departments are only concerned about audits we do about them. They should also be looking at audits that we do about other departments and programs to figure out what should they be doing in their programs to try and get them in a good place so that when I do come in here with an audit on their programs, I can say that, yeah, you know what, they're delivering this program. They seem to be trying to understand the program from the point of view of the citizen. So the fact that, so I think it's very important that departments learn from audits of others. So perhaps one thing the committee could think about doing is some sort of an overall summary report, perhaps, of some of the issues, the common issues that have come out from a number of different reports and things that departments should be learning from, a number of audits, right? So what are those common theme type of things? And then departments should be paying attention to those more. And then if we come back with an audit that says they haven't done it, well, the committee will have been in the position to say, look, we've even given you a bit of a roadmap for the types of things that you should be learning from audits that have been done on other departments. Obviously, they're not doing that on their own, so they might need a little bit of help, and maybe that's a role that the committee could play.
Thank you very much. Good, solid suggestions there. Thank you. We'll now move to Mr. Eria, please, for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Ferguson, for being here along with your team. There are thousands and thousands of hard-working public service employees getting their pay affected for no mistake of their own is absolutely unacceptable. You have pointed out that the cost to solve this problem is going to be more than $540 million. There's a huge burden, huge wastage of taxpayers' money. Who is responsible for this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The audit that we did on the Phoenix pay system did not look at, sort of all of the decision points along the way to put the system in place. The audit was about, what are the departments doing now to resolve the issue? We have a second audit underway right now that is going back and looking at the history that led up to the implementation of Phoenix, and we'll report on that in the spring.
Hopefully in that report you'll be able to identify who exactly was responsible for this mess we are in today.
Well, I think what we will be able to identify is what information was available along the way that needed to be considered, and how was it considered in making the decision, to the extent that we will be able to get down to more precision on that. I don't know at this point. We'll just have to wait and see as we complete that audit.
Okay. We have very bright, very well qualified public service employees here, very talented. Did you find in solving this problem that the senior management did actually did consult these employees?
What I would say is, at a lot of the departments and organizations had to try to problem solve the issues that were specific to themselves. And I think we probably did see a lot of, creative brain power brought to those issues, certainly at the individual department level, as they were trying to, because they were dealing with the nuts and bolts of the issues, and I think we saw a lot of them trying to find solutions, which is all good. And again, it's in that vein of making sure people are paid and paid on time. But all of those types of solutions may very well be things that are outside the system that later on need to be brought into a more systematic way so that they're actually part of the system.
One thing, underlying thing I see throughout this process is the role of outside consultants. Some consultant go to a minister and sell an hair braid solution, consolidate everything, you can have a huge savings, and then the process starts. Every step of the way, from conceptualization of the idea to implementing the idea, then solving the problems due to that implementation, then going back and saying that, further upgrade. Throughout this process, it appears that the government is relying very excessively on outside consultants instead of relying on the public service employees. The difference is the public service employees who are equally talented, probably more talented, more knowledgeable, they don't have profit motive, unlike an outside consultant who comes in. Do you think there was excessive reliance by the government on outside consultants?
So again, that wasn't the objective of the audit, looking at that. You know, again, we'll be down into a bit more of some of those questions in the second audit. But I think it's a good question for the department to answer. You know, under what circumstances did they decide that they needed help from outside consultants? And I understand that we can't expect all expertise to be you know, within the federal public service, and that there are needs from time to time to bring in outside consultants. But the departments also need to make sure that they are considering all of that expertise and advice in the right way, and that they're only getting it when they need it. But you know, I can't tell you sort of the specifics of when they decided to bring in outside consultants.
No, you said that, you know, we may not have entire expertise in-house. That I can understand in terms of technology. However, when it comes to things like the design parameters, I think you mentioned that one of the design parameter is every new employee who is hired, the input has to be put into the system the same day. If you talk to any HR consultant, any HR expert in a big organization employing thousands and thousands of employees, that is not going to be always the case. That sort of design can only come from an IT guy, not from a HR design. Anyway, going back, 1,200 pay advisors were eliminated in the process. The elimination started early 2015 when the staff were hired at Miramichi. So do you think that eliminating these pay advisors' position with an intention to show savings so that the budget can try to be balanced contribute to the problem we have today?
Well, I think certainly what I can say on that is, you know, what's happened is, in order to deal with the problems, the government has had to hire back those pay advisors, and in fact more. So what happened was, they reduced the number of pay advisors in the departments by 1,200, but they added about 550, I believe, in the Miramichi Pay Center. Okay. Since then, they have hired back a number of other pay advisors that has taken it up above the original 1,200.
That exactly is my point. The point was that the pay advisors were fired before the system could get stabilized, and that led to the problem we have today. And then we had to hire back to take care of the problem.
So I think certainly when you apply hindsight to it, you see that, you know, part of this solution has been to bring back the difference, and in fact bring back even more pay advisors. In hindsight, that has been part of the solution. Again, I can't tell you exactly what happened in terms of the decision to start making the change and the reduction, because we haven't looked at that yet. That wasn't part of this audit. But when you just apply the hindsight of what have they done, you know, if they had still had those pay advisors, then they would have had those people in place right away to help deal with the problem. They had to try to bring them back in order to deal with the problem, and in fact bring back even more.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ferguson. We'll now move to Mr. Nuttall, please. And we're in the second round, so you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir, and thank you to the Auditor General for providing these reports to us. And certainly there's, I think, some great educational opportunities for governments, not just this government, but for governments across the country. I think that I'd like to start by picking up where Mr. Christofferson finished, and then delve directly into the CRA audit. The message that I think comes through both your message and when looking at each individual report is that when it comes to Phoenix, we're failing our own employees. When it comes to a number of the other items like CRA, we're failing the citizens of Canada, and a client-centric approach does not seem to be in the mentality or culture of the Government of Canada on the whole. When we look specifically at the CRA, we have a reporting issue in terms of how they were reporting to the Auditor General, what type of, whether it was apples to apples in the sense that number of people versus volume of calls. We have an issue with block calls, as you said. We have an issue with the type of information that's being given out to their clients, which is the taxpayers of Canada. Whether it's accurate or not, as much as 30% of the information that's given to citizens is inaccurate. These are major issues at CRA, and we've seen other major issues out of CRA recently, which I know are not in the scope of the report. But I think there's certainly a theme here with regards to what's happening with the CRA, and there obviously needs to be major work completed. And I think just to add kind of insult to injury, when you think about what the CRA is and you compare it to the private sector, if you were calling to try to figure out what your payment was or the parameters for which your payment needs to be made in the private sector, and let's just use a telecom company because they're large companies, it is not very difficult to find out from them what you owe them and why you owe it to them. It is very, very, very easy to do that. It doesn't require 8 phone calls. They know right away. And so it kind of brings me to the issue. I was thinking about this last night. We had the opportunity to speak with you on a couple of occasions about this. Is the issue within the CRA the fact that the employees don't have the training to be able to answer the questions, therefore there's an avoidance to answer those questions, there's a nervousness around giving information to citizens, or is it just mismanagement and, kind of bureaucracy gone wild?
So the first thing I would like to say on that, and we identify it in the report, is we made 250 calls anonymously to the call centers. For every single one of those calls, the agents were very attentive to the question that we asked. They were very courteous, and they took their job very seriously. So we didn't perceive any nervousness or anything else like that. But I think there obviously is a training issue. 30% of the questions we answered, we got a wrong answer back. That we asked, we got a wrong answer back. And our questions were of a general type. They were not specific questions about specific taxpayer issues. They were general questions. The Canada Revenue Agency has a quality assurance mechanism in place whereby they try themselves to assess the caller accuracy, which I believe they do for each person in their call center every month. Every quarter, sorry. So they do try and track that, but they're not doing it in a way that actually gets to the accuracy. It isn't objective enough what they are doing. So they underestimate the level of errors, and therefore they only identified, I believe it was 3% of their call center agents who needed additional training, whereas based on our results, it looks like they need more training than that.
But if you are an auditor, so not if you're an auditor, when you're looking at different departments and you're looking for items that you'll see not irregularities but mistakes, you're not putting a 30% value on that. In a normal circumstance, you're looking at a 5% contingency or 6% contingency for whether it's monetary or otherwise. This is way out of the norm.
Well, yeah, 30%. 30% is certainly, an unacceptable level of error rate. I would even suggest, and here, I guess I'm venturing a little bit more just into my own opinion, but I would even venture to say that even if the error rate was the 6 or 7% that the CRA assessed it to be, I would say that in this world that would be too high as well. But again, that's my opinion. Maybe CRA would differ with me on that. But certainly, I think there's no question that a 30% error rate is too high.
Mr. Ferguson, a 30% error rate. Did you ever, in the calls, were you ever told that they didn't know the answer to the question?
Merci, Mr. President. So in some cases, we did get referred.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The question at the second tier, so because they were not able to provide the answer. At that point, we said thank you and we stopped the call and considered that to be a right answer to do.
So that was not knowing the answer was not part of the 30%, that was part of the 70%.
Yes.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to Ms. Shanahan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much again to the Auditor General and this team for providing us with I know when you're choosing your audit schedule, there's a certain, well, maybe you can talk to us a little bit about how you do that, but there's a certain amount of priority, but a certain amount of randomness too, but that we're able to see still these themes overriding each set of reports. For myself, I think this is my 4th round, and I'm certainly noticing that. When we're talking about these reports, we're really looking at the performance of the individual departments. We're looking at the value for the taxpayers' money. I have a set of measures that I use. Of course, I'm looking at the cost of the programs, but I'm also looking at things like public security and citizen health, and that has been a theme that you have referred to in the past as well, Auditor General, and we see that in the oral health programs for First Nations, where we're looking at really the health of our most vulnerable citizens. But another theme that is arising, and one that is quite surprising, because I do believe that our public service and our the services that the Government of Canada provides to its citizens, we've always had great pride in their quality, but now it's quality that appears to be an issue. And that is what I'm seeing, and we're going to have, of course, Phoenix is huge, a huge concern for us, and we're going to have the opportunity to delve deep into that at a later date. But when we're talking about the CRA call centers, which makes it look like they're responding to your questions, but they really are not at all. Even when we do something as urgent, probably that's where we did the best job. It was urgent, getting the money out to the Syrian refugee settlement agencies. But even there was a problem of getting the money to the ground. And of course, with our vulnerable populations, women offenders in correctional institutions, and then just a simple quality issue about how are we educating our future officers. Auditor General, my question for you is, are there any cases where in your reports where the departments, when you do these reviews, you're making recommendations? Are there any cases where the agencies or departments have difficulty with your recommendations? What was the kind of response that you were getting? And can you talk to us a little bit about where you see future action plans going?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess maybe the first thing, Mr. Chair, is I probably should have asked the member to do a summary of all of the audits, because I think she just summarized it better than I did in my opening statement. And the issues that we see. I mean, in the course of in the course of an audit, or there's a lot of back and forth that we have with the departments. And I think maybe I would use the audit that we did on First Nations and Inuit oral health as an example. Where we had a lot of conversations with the department about, what is it, what is that program, and what is that program supposed to do? And I think there was a lot of emphasis within the program about, paying for the services, and we felt that there should be more emphasis on their overall objective of improving the oral health of the population, so that they needed to they needed to put more focus on those overall global outcomes, not just on the day-to-day transaction processing, right? So that would have been an example of something where we had a number of conversations back and forth with the department to try to get to the right place. So there's a lot that goes into those conversations. There's a lot that goes into making the recommendations, and I think that's why you see that just about in all cases, departments will agree with our recommendations. But to get them to actually have a real action plan that is going to solve the problems, that's the work that has to happen after the audit. And again, that's where this committee is very important, is helping to ask questions of the department about their action plan and how you're going to know that that action plan is actually implemented. So we can only take it so far, and then we need the help of this committee to make sure that those action plans are real, they're robust, and that they can be realistically put in place.
Thank you, Auditor.
Thank you very much. Our time is up, and now we'll go back to Mr. Nuttall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank my colleague, Mr. Deltel, for allowing me to continue on this front. So when you look at the questions on the tables within the CRA report, you mentioned that a correct response is to refer to somebody else, or Mr. Dompierre did. And I actually agree with that. The last thing that we want as a government is the incorrect information going out there. It is a correct action to say, I don't know, and let's get the right information or the right person to give you that information. Understand that completely. What rate was the correct response on the first try? If we were to use my tax return was reassessed, I owe an amount, when should I expect collection action to begin if I'm objecting to a reassessment?
So I'll just start, and then I'll ask Monsieur Dompierre to give you the details. But remember, as he said, what happened is we would ask the question, and if the agent said, I'm going to have to pass you on to somebody else, we actually stopped the call at that point. So we didn't go further to actually see whether the second individual would give us the right answer or not, but we assumed because we were going to be passed on to somebody who had more expertise that we would. But in terms of what percentage of, I guess, sort of the 70% of correct answers, we awarded a correct answer because they referred us to somebody else. We didn't put that in the report. I'm not sure if we have that information.
We do have that information, but not with me right now. I could sort of go back and try to see if we could provide you with that information.
Okay, and if I can just follow up on these tables, and these are very, very, very explanatory, self-explanatory. When will the interest begin to be charged on my 2015 initial assessment? That question has a direct monetary impact on the person that's asking the question. The incorrect response rate was 84%, meaning 16% of the time the person gave the right answer, which was May the 2nd, or referred to somebody else. So 84% of the time, somebody was given a wrong answer that has a monetary impact on them. What happens in the situation that the person starts being charged, let's say, interest prior to what they were told on a phone call? And how do we know that, you've taken these notes and put this into a report because it was an auditing purpose? But when Joe Blow on the street calls in, or Joanne calls in and says X, gets answer of Y, then gets charged prematurely, how do they even fight this? How do they deal with their government?
So again, I'll answer, and I'll ask Monsieur Dompierre to correct me if I go wrong on this. But so I mean, if a person does not pay interest by the date that the interest is due, then the CRA in all likelihood is going to charge them is going to charge them interest. If they don't make their payment by the time it's due, then they're, in all likelihood they are going to be charged the interest. And then I guess if the person wants to take that up with the CRA, they will have to navigate the system again to get back in contact with CRA and try and say, well, wait a minute, you told me that I had to pay it on this date, I paid it on this date, and now you're charging me interest. So they would have to navigate all of that system all over again, one that they had some frustration with perhaps navigating in the first place just to be able to get the original question answered. So how that will end up being resolved, don't know, wasn't the point of the question, but it would put the individual back into having to try and take up their issue again with CRA.
Were there any circumstances, have we seen any circumstance, I know this wasn't necessarily the direct impact of the report, but have we seen circumstances where there was incorrect information given out from the federal government that the federal government then changes the amount that they're saying is owed based on the information they gave out originally?
So again,
we just didn't get there.
No, we couldn't get there because again, we weren't asking taxpayer-specific questions. To get to that type of detail, we would have had to go through a taxpayer file. We just asked the questions in a general sense.
For sure. Thank you so much. I think I'm...
Thank you, Mr. Null. You have 10 seconds, but I'll take it. Did you ever ask the question when you were giving false information to CRA, could we have that answer in writing? Because I get told by constituents, I think it's probably happened to us, where there's information that, you know, you're on the phone, you finally do get through after being maybe blocked so many times, and then you get the information, and all you have is, it's really just your word against somebody else's if it's on the phone. Would you ever ask, can we have that answer, or can we have that in an email or in writing?
So, Mr. Chair, we did not ask that sort of specific sort of request. We were trying to keep the exchange anonymous as we were getting a right or wrong answer. If it was right, we were saying thank you. If not, we were sort of either cutting off the conversation.
I guess that would make sense. You wouldn't say just send it to the Auditor General of Canada's email address. They might catch on. Mr. Ferguson.
But of course, you know, as you can see, we documented all of the answers that we did get, right? You know, as part of our audit procedures. So we didn't go that step, as you say. That would have been a little odd, but we did document all of the answers we received.
All right, thank you. We'll now go back to Monsieur Lefebvre. Monsieur Lefebvre, vous avez 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Christofferson, or his concern that he's raised about with respect to your comments, Mr. Ferguson, when you started and you finished with respect to the, and I'll cite it, I find myself delivering this message audit after audit and year after year because we still see that departments are focused on their own activities, not on the citizens' perspective. The audits we have delivered this week are no exception, as you will see. And Mr. Christofferson asked you with respect, what can we do? What can we do more to try to improve or try to change the way that the government provides the services? Because basically from what I'm seeing is that it's most of the time our public services focused on getting it a program on time, on budget, and basically and to deliver it and get results. And the lens of the citizen is not something that is actually taken into account. So I'm wondering, do you think it's a good idea that maybe we bring to this committee the clerk of the Privy Council and have that discussion with the clerk and to see how we can change or add that lens to ensure that lens is provided by the clerk of the Privy Council to all deputy ministers?
Well, I think I'll let the committee consider, whether it should bring the clerk forward. But I think what encourages me is certainly the interest in the committee, the committee's interest in trying to get the departments, get the whole sort of government machinery to understand the importance of this. Perhaps something else, and again, this is just, something that is coming to me right now, perhaps some sort of a review of some departmental performance reports, looking for, do there seem to be some indicators in some of those that are dealing with services to citizens, and would there be something that Some of those that you might look at and say, well, at least on the surface, some of these look good, but some of these other ones aren't really telling us very much about the service. So I don't know whether you might want to do something like that. That I probably just created a whole bunch of work for your analysts.
That's great. That's fine, because actually that's. I'm a bit looking at the macro level right now, because we're going to have the time to deal with all of the auditors, all of your reports one by one, and we will go through all of them. I really hope we do. And that brings me to my second question. In my observation in the past few years as being here, every time that there's a transformational program, or they're trying to transform something, we saw it with shared services, and now we're seeing it with Phoenix. It's as if these are large projects. We all recognize that, but it's as if there's an incapacity, or there's a serious difficulty in getting the result that is aimed for, and that's concerning. That the program after program, transformation after transformation, we're either off budget, or we're not on time, or basically we're not getting the results, or it's not at all what we thought it was because of various reasons. But what internal changes should be brought forward? Because it's one thing to say, if we keep doing in the next project that we're trying to transform or change something, if we keep doing the same thing that we've done in the past, from what I'm seeing, we'll just get the same results. So how can we advise, or you advise, our public service, the deputy ministers, that when they go to having a new project to transform, change something, what can be added, what has to be done?
So I would suggest probably a couple of things. One is, when there is the original acceptance of a project to do, if you're talking about a payroll system, you're talking about shared services, whatever you're talking about, the chances that the project sponsor will be able to come forward very early on at the conception point of the idea, and the acceptance of the project, and give a precise number of how much that is going to cost, and a precise date of when it is going to be delivered, and a precise number of what the end impact is going to be in terms of whether there's going to be efficiencies. It would be, I would say, extremely rare for somebody to be able to come in at the conception of these very complex projects and say, this is going to cost me X number of dollars, I'm going to deliver it on this date, and it's going to save you this amount of money. Those things need to be updated during the course of the whole project, okay? Based on what is being learned through the course of the project. There will need to be some understanding that, well, this is starting to look more complex than we originally thought, so maybe it's going to cost more. Maybe we need to delay it some more. So those things will all have to be considered. Maybe we can't do everything we thought we were going to be able to do in the first place, or maybe we can do this, but it's not going to provide us all the efficiencies that we thought. Those things all need to be updated during the course of the project, so that I think what happens too often is these projects get anchored on amounts that were established very early on. Okay, so I think that's one part of understanding these types of projects. I would say the other thing is, never underestimate the importance of a good governance structure on complex projects. Okay, so it can't all be in the hands of the individuals or the team that are responsible for delivering the project. There needs to be some oversight by people who are not just the project deliverers. And then there needs to be some outside expertise, which could very well, or independent expertise that can advise the oversight, the individuals charged with the oversight. So that could even be internal audit. It could be outside evaluators, but they should be reporting to the people with the oversight, not reporting to the people that are delivering the project. And I'm not saying that's what's happened in any of these. No. I'm saying conceptually, those are the types of things that I think are needed.
Just correct me if I'm wrong, then these are not, what you just suggested, that it does not exist right now in the public service in the way that the governance structure is modeled.
No, I'm not saying that it doesn't exist. I'm saying that conceptually, those are the types of things that need to be in place. Okay. We would have to look at it project by project to say, okay, was it managed this way or was it managed some other way?
Okay.
Thank you very much. 2 minutes over there. We'll now go to Mr. Christofferson, please.
Great. Excellent discussion. Thank you. I saw this in the lobby, and I sort of knew these things existed, but I really didn't. This is the Office of the Taxpayer Ombudsman. Fairness, a right, not a privilege. First off, is there any interaction between your office and the Ombudsman's office? And if so, what is that?
By the interaction we have, we consult them basically when we sort of decide to do an audit, but consulting for just information as we start an audit. So that would be one.
Are you able to tell us initially what sort of feedback you got from them when you touch base with them?
I think they had raised that there was some concern about the call centers, that they do their own sort of complaints mechanism or receive complaints from citizens about issues, and call centers were on the top 5, I would say, a list of concern by citizens.
Did they say what they were doing about it?
Not sort of. They say that they react to these complaints, but that's more something for them.
I can tell you what they did about it. Nothing. And it's right in their report. And like one of the things that and I'm raising this because it's so timely, but I mean, one of the things we do is not only look for results, but we also take a look at the oversight. Was there proper oversight? And if not, and Mr. Ferguson just alluded to some of that. And I got to tell you, this is $2.3 million of taxpayer money for this ombudsman who reports to the minister only. It's an interesting read, colleagues. For instance, they say that our role is not to be an advocate for taxpayers, and yet, under the bold heading of who we serve, they say we serve taxpayers. Yeah. So anyway, on this issue, buried on page 23, it's a very lovely brochure, by the way. Very nice and glossy and lots of big pictures. A lot of time was spent on this. A nice product. $2.3 million. One of the biggest issues we found in this study through the auditor was the inability of Canadians to even connect. If ever there was a disconnect, it's the inability to connect. So the biggest issue and here's what this $2.3 million got us on this file. Connecting with the CRA through the general inquiry lines. Our office has received numerous complaints from taxpayers and representatives in recent years claiming it is very difficult to connect with the CRA's general inquiries telephone lines. A recurring complaint from taxpayers is that they reach a busy signal, regardless of the time of day they call, forcing them to make multiple calls. Dead accurate. What'd they do about it? Given the announcement of increased funding for telephone access and initiatives underway by the CRA, our office is not opening an examination at this time, but, it's okay everybody, but we are monitoring this issue. So $2.3 million worth of monitoring, and it took the Auditor General to tell us we have a problem. Now, normally we don't go in this direction, but I'll be talking to colleagues about how we look at this, because this whole office exists to help Canadians deal with these kinds of issues, and from what I can see, they failed. So part of our review, and maybe it's part of the prescription in solving it, is that we ask the minister, because this ombudsman reports to the minister, is ask the minister to change the mandate or review it or do something. But I got to tell you, when I saw this thing and I went inside and saw that it cost $2.3 million to run this office, and on the biggest issue we're facing, that's all they had to say. And because the minister said it's okay, we're increasing the budget, the ombudsman went, oh, okay, well, obviously no big problem, it'll get solved. That's not how oversight's supposed to work. So, to the taxpayer ombudsman, we're coming. Your thoughts? I'll just leave it at that. That's more of a statement. It's a bit of a rant more than anything. But I was kind of frustrated this was there. If there's room for a response, I'd love it. If not, I'm happy to have my rant. Thank you.
There's actually no room, but we did enjoy your rant.
I aim to be entertaining, if not helpful.
All right, we'll now move to Monsieur Daltel, please. Monsieur Daltel for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will try to do my best after this fantastic prestation by my colleague from the NDP. Monsieur le Président, j'aimerais aborder la question des
Mr. Chair, I'd like to talk about Syrian refugees. You focused your audit on the measures that were taken and on the results that were provided. Were we able to welcome refugees correctly? There were many of them in 2015, 16, and most recently as well. What we've noticed when we read the report is that your evaluation criteria, and I'm not blaming you, but they're still kind of unclear. We don't have any precise indicators that say yes or no, it was a success. It's really difficult to measure integration or the successful settlement of immigrants. There's two things I'd like to say. First, there's the general portrait and the one for Quebec. In Quebec, we realized that since immigration is mostly a provincial jurisdiction, it has been so for roughly 30 years, it's difficult for you to have access to information. But with regard to the Canadian government, in your opinion, what should be done to make sure we can more adequately measure the quality of the way we welcome immigrants to Canada? First, it is the role of the Department of Immigration and Refugees Canada to evaluate the successful programs for welcoming Syrian immigrants to Canada. So that's one of their roles and responsibilities. And what we identified in our report is that the measures that are currently in place focus on federal activities of the federal government. There are things such as whether needs of these refugees were evaluated to determine what they needed. Also, whether these refugees started language training in one of our official languages. So they only looked at federal activities. But the second thing, and another important point, to understand how these refugees are able to settle in Canada, it's important to understand provincial services as well. For example, are refugee children are able to register in schools? Do they have access to the necessary services for health? There are other things like that on the provincial level. And the department determined that these type of measures and figures were important, but the department was unable to obtain the information it needed to understand provincial integration. So I think it's very important for the department to obtain this type of information to be able to fulfill their responsibilities, to fully understand integration of refugees in Canada.
Back to Mr. Chen, please.
Thank you very much. And I want to start off by thanking the Auditor General and his team and to thank them once again for their outstanding work and this set of reports. I want to echo the concerns that have been expressed by my colleagues around the table, and particularly Mr. Christofferson, you pointed to the Auditor General's opening statement in which he expressed the overall message that audit after audit, year after year, we still see that departments are focused on their own activities, not on the citizens' perspectives. And we've talked around the table today about the concerns of citizens, the experiences of citizens, and service to citizens. And I want to start off by taking a moment to first deconstruct this terminology, because I believe it's very important that we are clear on whom we serve. And that, to me, is Canadians in the most general broadest and most inclusive sense. Whether we are talking about the oral health of First Nations and Inuit children or Syrian refugees who have now been welcomed to their new home, or Indigenous women offenders who are not provided with culturally appropriate programs, or women offenders in general who are subjected to correctional programs designed for men, not women. To me, we need to be clear that we are talking about all Canadians, and to understand who they are and to be able to provide the types of service and programming that is very clear in meeting the needs of all Canadians. With that said, I want to focus on the audit with respect to the Phoenix Pay System. Exhibit 1.2 on page 7 of the Auditor General's report shows a graph of the number of public servants with outstanding pay requests in 46 departments and agencies. And this graph shows very clearly that over the course of 2 years, we see that under the Miramichi pay system, 15,000 public servants with outstanding pay requests. That amount goes up to 35,000 in January of 2016 when Phoenix is first adopted. And then we see an exponential increase of the number of outstanding pay requests going up to the latest number here, June 2017, of 150,000. If I were to take this graph at face value, I would understand it to be what it is described as: 46 departments and agencies, and these are the public services under those departments. But reading the report tells me something a bit different. It points out the fact that these outstanding pay requests were not capturing the information from all departments over those 2 years, not all 46 departments, because some of them were not on board those systems. So I'd like to hear the Auditor General's comment on what this means, because to me, at face value, it means an increase, a significant and very worrisome increase in the number of cases. However, reading the report tells me that this increase can be attributed to departments that perhaps were not on the Miramichi pay system or the Phoenix pay system at certain points in time. So I'd like to hear the Auditor General's comments.
And I'll start to try and give you an explanation and ask Mr. Goulet for more details. But so the graph is dealing with just the 46 departments. So it is dealing with the departments that were being served by the Miramichi Pay Center. And certainly, you know, by the time that all the second wave was done, you know, everything had been transferred, and everything that happened after that was, you know, happening in the new pay system. But of course, there was a transition period of getting the 46 departments all processed, having their pay requests processed at the Miramichi Pay Center. And that would have happened over a period of time as their pay advisors were removed and the services were starting to be provided at the Miramichi Pay Center. So I'm not sure, and maybe Mr. Goulet has the details about exactly when, you know, those services started to move over to the Pay Center and at what pace those 46 departments moved over and by what time all of that was completed. So I'll ask Mr. Goulet to provide those details if he has them.
So thank you for the question. The move of employee files to Miramichi from the 46 departments occurred in 3 waves starting in 2012 all the way up to the rollout of Phoenix. As you can see in the graph, with the employees going over to Miramichi, there's an increase in the number of outstanding pay requests or number of employees with outstanding pay requests. The initial intent of the department was that with the centralization, efficiencies would be generated, and this would actually be coming down, but this was not the case. So at the end, when Phoenix rolled out, Again, the expectation of the department was that there would be a significant increase in efficiencies, which would compensate for the employees coming over to Miramichi and would also allow them to deal with the backlog that had accumulated from the wave of departments moving over to Miramichi. Obviously, that did not materialize. Contrary to that, it actually spiked because obviously Phoenix was not delivering the efficiencies that was promised.
And Mr. Chen. We'll now go to Mr. Nuttall and then to Ms. Mendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to continue with the CRA audit. After we determined that there's a 30% inaccuracy rate in terms of the information provided by persons working for the CRA. Your report goes into the information that's provided by CRA in terms of them auditing their own activities, whether it's inaccuracy, their 6% rate versus your 30%, the number of calls because they don't include the blocked calls or calls that don't actually reach somebody in that process. You recommend training. You recommend better services in terms of tracking what's going on at CRA. What do you recommend in terms of a follow-up time period on this? I mean, to go from a 30% inaccuracy rate, what would be a good timeline for us to look at this and to ask and demand for more information on changes that hopefully have been made?
My response would be that they need to resolve this very quickly. So I would very much suggest pushing for short time frames. You know, a 30% error rate on people coming forward with tax questions certainly is not appropriate. So what they need to do is they need to get their own internal quality assurance measurement. They need to get that to the point where it is accurate so that they can track what is the error rate so that they don't have to wait for us or somebody else to come in and do it. They've been doing that, but again, the process they use is not independent. So for example, you know, they will make anonymous calls to the agents as well and ask questions similar to the ones that we made. But the agents say that, well, you know, when they get that call, the call display shows that the call is coming from a test line, okay? So they know that this is a call that is monitoring their performance. So again, if you go back to a right answer is just to say, I don't know, I've got to pass you on. Well, if you know you're being monitored, you might be more likely to say, I'd better just say, I don't know, I'm going to pass it on, or, you know, or other ways of the behavior being affected. So they need to have a better way of making sure that they get a true and accurate picture of the error rate. They need to get the additional training in place, and then they need to be able to demonstrate very quickly that this error rate is starting to go in the right direction.
Where is the issue? Is the issue, in your opinion at this point, is the issue a top-down issue? Is this strictly a training issue, whether it's of the quality assurance side or the actual people who are client-facing?
So I see three parts to the issue. There are the people answering the questions, and they need to have the ability to answer the questions. And again, in the audit, we pointed out that in some cases, they have to go to a number of different screens themselves to try to find the answer, okay? So the people need the tools and the training to be able to answer the question. Perhaps, you know, the department is saying they need better technology to be able to respond to more calls, so they can explain that and to what extent that is part of the issue. But I think the other part is they need to look at the front end as well. They need to look at their website. You know, in their own survey, about 40% of the people that called on the individual line, so individuals looking for answers to their tax questions, about 40% of them said essentially that they couldn't find the answer to their tax question on the website, and that's why they were calling. So you know, I think part of what they need to do is be able to provide better, more easily accessible information on their website, and that would help reduce the calls, and it would add more consistency in the responses as well.
Small
minute.
Beautiful. So with all that said, if your business is taxation and somebody asks you when the interest is going to be charged on taxes owing, like, this is basically almost as easy question as you can get. How are we not training our, it amazes me that we need a screen to do that. How is it that we don't have the training in place to show these people? Like, this is basic. If somebody calls me when I was a banker and said, Alex, when does the interest start accruing? I know the answer to that every single time, and that's different on every single deal because I just know my business. How do our employees not know their business when it comes to, you know, everybody in the country is the same on this answer?
Well, and again, I think that's part of what's particularly concerning with our results is we were not asking very complex tax questions that people had to get into a lot of detail in the Tax Act or anything about. We were asking pretty general questions that you would expect a high rate of getting a right answer. So, you know, I can't sort of go any further other than to say, you know, we obviously were very concerned about the results that we were getting in these tests.
Thank you very much. All right, we'll now go to Ms. Mendez.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank you, Mr. Ferguson, and all your team for being with us here today. I'd like to go back to what Mr. Deltel said with regard to how we welcome Syrian refugees. I'd like to share with you, Mr. Ferguson, and with all my colleagues, today the Quebec Auditor General just did a report on refugees and just published it, so I'd like to refer you to this report, which is not a shining report for follow-up services in Quebec with regard to welcoming and settling Syrian refugees. So this is alarming when you see that we're not able to get the necessary information. We have to see how people who arrive to Canada are integrated. Nevertheless, Quebec being an exception, we're talking about other provinces here, how do we capture this data that will allow us to evaluate whether we're being successful with our settlement programs and integration and welcoming programs? Would it be possible, I know I've already asked a question on another topic in the same lines, but could we have opinion surveys from customers or people who receive services? Is it relatively easy? Because we know that it's really easy to follow these people where they are the first couple of years. Would it at all be possible to recommend to the department to continually do these surveys? They should be able to get the information they need to make sure they receive appropriate health, education, job search services. So all of these are part of the services that are offered. Would it be possible to consider this, and would it be something you'd wish for? What we identified when we did our audit was that it would be important for the department to get the information, to be able to evaluate the settlement of refugees. And I think there are different ways that they could do so. First, it could have agreements with provincial governments to obtain some type of information. I think this type of surveys would also be a possibility. So in my opinion, it's a very important question for the department to find out whether it could be possible to do such surveys with refugees. Well, once again, we'll be looking at data capturing that we checked with you. That's a continuous problem within the department. If these surveys are done, do you believe that the department is currently able to capture this data and to evaluate it? There are always some details in a process when you do a survey. Are people prepared to participate in a survey? Because there are some questions with privacy but overall, I think it's a good idea, but the department must explain whether it's possible to do this type of survey or not. It would be an appropriate question for the department, not only to do it, but then to find out whether they could capture the data and evaluate it. That's often what we find. Once again, we're going back to your key message here. It's nice to be able to evaluate the actual numbers to see whether the service is given, but we also have to look at the quality and to evaluate it from a citizen perspective. Sometimes we're unable to find whether we're respecting our main mission, that is to offer services to citizens. So I'll stop there. I don't know.
We're back and forth now, so your time is pretty well up. We'll now move to Monsieur Deltel, please.
Mr. Speaker, so I will continue on the same page concernant la question des Syriens.
I'd like to go back to the Syrian refugee question. In 3.35, you said that you did an evaluation between that refugees that are sponsored by the government and those that are sponsored by private citizens. So I'd like to quote here, the department noted that Syrian refugees privately sponsored knew English or French more than those sponsored by the government. So 82.1% knew some English or French on arrival compared to 16% of government-assisted refugees. So we can understand those who are sponsored by private individuals are identified by companies or private entities. Is that explains why that there's such a strong difference here? It's 4 times higher. They're more likely to speak an official language of Canada. We saw it more often in the case of refugees that were privately sponsored. There is a link between these people and the people who are established in Canada already. Sometimes they have family members. So if they have a family member, it can explain why another family member would have some knowledge of an official language of Canada. Yes, there were some differences with these type of people who were privately sponsored.
Can we say that it's better to have more people from the private sector instead of the government sponsorship because they know exactly where to go? People in Canada identify them, so it's more easy to them to be integrated in this country instead of being sponsored by the government.
Well, I can't give you sort of a precise, which one is better or how much should be done under one avenue or another. I guess, and again, that's something that the department could explain. I think it comes down to starting out with what is the capacity of private sector sponsors to sponsor refugees, and is that sufficient? So I think really the department would have to explain to you how they manage that split between refugees that are sponsored privately and those that are sponsored by the government.
Ça me conduit à une autre question, Monsieur le vérificateur.
Brings me to another question, Mr. Ferguson. This is an important question. Should we welcome more privately sponsored refugees rather than a government assistant? ones. In your report, aside from language training, I didn't see any analysis on this question. Whether they were able to find jobs, were their kids able to go to school? I know if Quebec, it's another situation. It's their jurisdiction. But would it be good to analyze the results of integration of refugees in a privately sponsored versus government-assisted refugee lens? It's the responsibility of the department to understand the integration of these refugees. So I think that they have the data to conduct such an analysis. It would be good. They could do perhaps a more specific analysis of subpopulations of refugees. So yes, with this type of data, that could be a good idea to evaluate the various streams for various types of refugees. If I look at what you've analyzed in the report from this aspect, privately sponsored versus government-assisted refugees, 81% or 82% of refugees privately sponsored knew a language versus only 16% of government-assisted refugees. Is it not obvious that we should focus more on privately sponsored refugees rather than government-assisted to help with integration? This would be a question for the department. But as I said, there are differences between refugees who are privately sponsored and those who are government-assisted. Because there are these differences, I think this would be a question you could ask the department, whether they should evaluate all of these activities.
Madam Shanahan.
Very much, Chair. And, thank you, Auditor General, and to your team. And I'd like to continue. We're moving on to some of the other reports, and I think that's important in this initial meeting that we get a sense of where the problems are and what degree they're present. The two reports that concern me right now are number 4 and 5. The oral health problems for First Nations. You made the remark that and data collection and measurement have been a theme, an overriding theme in our work. It was that the department couldn't tell you why the fewer children were being reached. There was some success in the preventing of problems with oral health with children, but there were fewer children enrolled in the program. Fewer services are provided under the initiative than in previous years, and Health Canada does not know why this is the case. So I'd like to hear your remarks on that, or a member of your team. And then I'd like to go to Report 5 as well. If there was never a case for gender-based analysis plus, this is certainly the poster child for that policy tool, and I'd like to hear some remarks about how we can use GBA Plus to better accomplish what we're putting money out to do.
So I'll ask Ms. Thomas to deal with the question about the Children's Oral Health Initiative. And in terms of the Gender-Based Analysis Plus, we didn't look at that specifically in terms of the audit that we had on the women offenders, but I will ask Ms. McCalla, after Ms. Thomas, I'll ask Ms. McCalla to deal with some of the sort of gender-specific issues that we found in that audit.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. With respect to the Children's Oral Health Initiative, the program is focused on prevention. So there are two elements to that are important to look at: the children that are being enrolled and the services that are being provided. With respect to the children that are being enrolled, it does look like enrollment is going down. Similarly with, and their targets are not being met. Similarly with the services that are being provided, such as sealants and fluoride treatments, similarly those services seem to be decreasing as well. When we asked the department why this was the case, they felt that this was a data collection and analysis issue, and they were not able to provide us with any other reasons as to why these declines had occurred. They are working on a data strategy, but it hadn't been put in place at the time of our audit.
And had there been a change in their data collection methods from earlier reports to this time? Why would they not be able to explain the difference?
From our perspective, we looked at a specific period of time, and that had occurred over time. It didn't seem as if they had made any changes in how they were processing or how they were managing. So they simply weren't able to, they hadn't noticed they hadn't done the work themselves to assess why the declines had occurred.
So this is something we can question them on when they appear before us. Thank you very much. Yeah.
So for our audit of women offenders, we looked to see how well correctional services was meeting the unique needs of women offenders. It's been 25 years since the government closed the Kingston Prison for Women, so we looked to see the extent to which correctional services now provides programs and services that are responsive to the unique needs of women as it's required to do in its legislation. Primarily, we found that as soon as women enter the system, they have not yet developed a security classification tool that's appropriate for women offenders. It still uses the security classification tool it developed 25 years ago for male offenders. As well, it uses this tool to determine the rehabilitation needs, which is problematic because the tool wasn't designed for this purpose. And more problematic for us is that it has developed a tool to determine program needs that would be more appropriate for women offenders, but it hasn't yet put that into use. Then we did see that it had developed correctional programs specifically for women offenders and for Indigenous women offenders. The problem was that it was unable to deliver these programs to women before they were first eligible for parole. And as a result, women offenders stayed in custody past their day parole eligibility dates. And as a result, served more of their sentences in custody rather than in the community, which is much more effective for their long-term successful reintegration. Most of correctional services, women offenders, are serving short-term sentences, which means they're eligible for parole within a year of entry, yet correctional services is unable to deliver the programs by this time. So we made recommendations that they improve the delivery of these correctional programs to the women offenders. And finally, we looked at the delivery of mental health services because a significant portion of women offenders have mental health issues, and we found that treatment plans weren't being completed for women offenders in a timely manner. They weren't tracking systematically the delivery of mental health services to women offenders. There were significant shortfalls in the resources that they said they needed in terms of hospital beds in psychiatric hospitals and psychologists on staff. And finally, we looked at the number of women in segregation and the segregation of women with mental health issues, which we found problematic.
Thank you. Thank you to all. I just have one question on that, and I asked our analysts to pull up the definition of segregation. I know what segregation means, but the official correctional definition of segregation, and it says the separation of an inmate to prevent association with other inmates when specific legal requirements are met, other than pursuant to a disciplinary action. So, you make quite you make quite a finding. We found that CSC placed in segregation cells women offenders who are at risk of harming themselves or suicide. And then you make a statement that says it is not appropriate to keep women offenders with serious mental health issues in segregation cells. And yet, according to their definition, when specific legal requirements are met, and if they're going to face, or if they're looking at suicide or hurting themselves, I guess I can understand why they may choose to protect those around them within the correctional system as well. But then you say something that's quite problematic. I mean, not that you say it, but where they do not get the clinical support. I have no problem with protecting women or men in segregation from themselves or others, but why would that mean that they wouldn't get clinical support?
Mr. Chair, it's because the system is not geared up to provide that support. You know, it's the problem. The problem is not necessarily the fact that they have to find a way to help the women and protect them from harming themselves or from attempting suicide. They do need to find a way to do that, but they need to find the way to do that that is appropriate from a mental health point of view, as opposed to a correctional point of view, right? And so what they're using, what they have been using, is the only tool available to them, really, or the main tool available to them, which was they have these cells on the segregation range where they put these women. But they don't have the same type of you know, mental health support and sort of mental health clinical environment, perhaps, that a person in that was being isolated in a mental health hospital would have, for example, right? So there are people that are not part of the correctional services that are in mental health institutions and are also, you know, a risk of suicide or self-harm, and they have to be put in an environment where they can be monitored to make sure that they don't harm themselves, but they have all of the other clinical support around them to try and help manage that issue. Whereas in the correctional system, they don't always have that. What they have is the one tool, which is isolate the individual, put them in the segregation cell, but they don't always have all of the rest of the support that the person needs to get through that period of time when they're at a risk of harming themselves or trying to commit suicide.
So that is a big problem. I mean, given, you know, I mean, that correctional services, we understand the majority of people, I mean, and they bring people in that are experts, but the majority of people are not, you know, psychologists or psychiatrists who can deal with these guys. They're very good correctional officers, but you know, the thought that they can take and lock them in isolation, it's almost like lock them up and throw away the key is, you know, please tell me that's not what's happening. I mean, they can't take them out of segregation and then get them the mental health help they need?
So no, it's not sort of the extent to which you just described it. They're using the cells on their segregation range, you know, for these women with serious mental health issues that are at a risk of self-harm. You know, even in that environment, the individual will be outside the cell for, I believe, 2 hours a day, right? So they're not, you know, just locked in there. They do have the ability to be out, and they do try to restrict the number of days that they are actually in those cells. So they do monitor it from that point of view. But I think the fundamental problem, and this is a very serious problem in the whole correctional service, not just federally even, it's a problem at the provincial level as well, is that more and more, you know, the people that they are dealing with are people that have these types of mental health issues, and these institutions are being asked to deal with people with serious mental health issues, but they're correctional facilities, right? They're facilities that are about keeping people away from the rest of the population for a certain period of time. They're being landed with a lot of these types of cases, and it's, you know, they don't always have, you know, the capacity to deal with them. So it's not something we've yet done an audit on, the whole mental health issue in correctional services. I think it's something we need to put on our list to look at, but I think it is a very critical issue in the correctional service world.
Thank you very much. Mr. Christofferson.
Chair, I want to thank you for putting the focus on this. It's a key area, and I appreciate just a moment. I have a little bit of background in this. When I was on city council, with regional council, actually, I chaired a task force on issues, at that time was people with psychiatric disabilities was the terms used, but it was the whole issue of here we were at the city, we've got people on the streets, there's mental health issues, and there was a revolving door where the police would be asked to intervene. Remember, you've got a mental health issue. The police are asked to intervene. The police don't know what to do. And so often what they'll do is take them to the hospital system, and the hospital system may be able to stabilize them for a while, but then they're back out on the street, and if they've got mental health issues, they're going to be acting out again. I don't know if that's the terminology, but there's going to be problems again, and it was the revolving door. Fast forward a few years, I find myself sitting at the cabinet table as the minister responsible for corrections provincially, and lo and behold, all the studies in front of me are showing the same thing. And as much as I made some attempt, I didn't change a darn thing. I'd like to say I did, but I didn't. And here we are now, pushing 2.5 decades later, and we've still got the same problem. And again, it's that revolving door where people go from the police being involved to the mental health system, and then ultimately they end up in the criminal justice system, and they shouldn't be. They're not criminals, they've got mental health issues, but we don't have a system that allows us to deal with this. So personally, I've seen this now at the local level, at the provincial level, and now at the federal level, and the last thing you said, Auditor General, about stepping in and doing a massive overall look at this, please, I implore you. My experience is telling me that no matter how much good people are trying, we're not able to change it, and we're not able to help the issue, and more and more people are finding mental health stresses. It's only going to get worse, and we need a massive intervention in a way that can make a difference, and that's you in your office. So for what it's worth, I want to put as much support as I can behind you to take a look at this broader system. We need a major overhaul, and thank you, Chair, for putting a focus on this. It's a key issue no matter who you talk to in society, and we have a unique opportunity here to at least be part of changing that if we can. So please, let's get on this, folks. Otherwise, it's just going to continue to be a revolving door, and we're not going to meet the needs of our citizens. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And I think what committee members are taking from today's meeting, where we've had a very good overview of the entire audit that has just been released by our Auditor General of Canada. We have a number of studies that will be coming out of this audit. For Canadians that may be watching, we have the Phoenix pay problems, the call centers at CRA, settlement services for Syrian refugees, oral health programs for First Nations and Inuit, preparing women offenders for release, Royal Military College of Canada, National Capital Commission, and the Atomic Energy of Canada Limited. And I think the will of the committee, and we will be asking you more formally, is will we do a study on each one of these? And what I'm kind of hearing back is that we need to. And so we can all give evidence and stories from our constituencies on many of these chapters. I asked my staff in my constituency office, typically about 65–70% in a rural riding of what we do in that constituency office is immigration. She told me that this fall she has equal files of Phoenix. And I have one Drumheller Penitentiary in my riding, most coming out of there. And I applaud them for getting to the members. And each one of you have stories like that, anecdotal stories that you can tell, of people afraid of making payments and things like that. So this committee, starting next week, we'll look at the Phoenix problem more carefully, and from there on we will look at all of these chapters. And you've helped us today, you've helped us with the audit. We look forward to you coming back when we do these chapters of study. So thank you very much, and we are now adjourned.